Number 8. Lark LX Amphibious Vehicles. In 2022, beachgoers at Island Beach State Park in Ocean County, New Jersey were perplexed when two extremely rare Vietnam-era amphibious vehicles appeared on the shore overnight. As it turned out, a brother and a sister from Virginia who were involved in marine construction had bought them from a previous owner in Staten Island. They were navigating them to Chesapeake Bay when they ran into mechanical issues. After losing 2 engines, they decided it would be wisest to pull over and fix the vehicles. John Hennage, who was driving one of the vehicles, told local station News 12 New Jersey that the area where he runs his business lacks the infrastructure to easily transport materials in from the road, and that the amphibious vehicles enable the company to import a lot of what they need by water. Unfortunately, they ran into problems even after spending months repairing the vehicles. These amphibious giants were both identified as Lark LXs. Weighing in at 200,000 tons, the Lark LX is the largest amphibious craft ever built by the U.S. military. It was built in 1952 and improved upon from there, with the first Lark LXs seeing active duty in South Vietnam in 1967. The Lark LX was designed for carrying tanks and shipping containers and could hold up to 100 tons of cargo or around 200 people. On land, each wheel was powered by a 265 horsepower diesel engine. In the water, the 4 engines worked in pairs to drive 2 propellers. The vehicles reached a top speed of 20 miles per hour on land and 7.5 miles per hour on water. The military retired the last of its Larks in 2001. There are only 5 or 6 functional examples left in the world, according to Hennage. Most are privately owned, and a few are reportedly used by construction companies. Number 7. Strump Panzer I Bison. Unofficially dubbed the Strump Panzer I Bison, the 15 cm SIG 33 SF Auf Panzerkampfwagen 1 Aus FB was a German self-propelled gun that was used during World War II. After learning that the infantry had trouble keeping up with tanks during combat during the German invasion of Poland, the military began mounting the gun on the chassis of a tank to carry it into battle. A separate vehicle carried the ammunition, and the setup only offered the shooter minor protection from the small shell fragments and debris. Altogether, around 38 of the modified guns were created. These photos appear to show a Strump Panzer I Bison that was recovered from a German river in 1995. It's likely safe to assume that it's one of just a few surviving examples of the rare gun, although it's unclear what ended up happening to the one in these images. Number 6. World War II Swamp Boat. Lake Mead is Nevada's largest reservoir. It's made headlines many times recently as the region struggles with droughts and dramatically decreasing water levels. In 2022, the lake hit a record low. And while less water is never good news when it comes to Lake Mead, the rapidly receding waters have revealed a plethora of fascinating finds, including a World War II-era landing craft known as a Higgins boat. Designed during the 1930s by a boat builder from New Orleans named Andrew Higgins, the boat was based on its inventor's previous American swamp boats. Over 23,000 of the mostly plywood vessels were built throughout the Second World War. They were mainly used for carrying soldiers and fighting vehicles from ships to beaches and played a major role in the Allied invasion of Normandy, famously known as D-Day. The Higgins boat that appeared along Lake Mead's rapidly shrinking shoreline was sold to a private buyer as military surplus after the war, according to Las Vegas Review-Journal. Its owner used it to survey the Colorado River before selling it to a marina on Lake Mead, where it was scuttled as part of a breakwater. Now that it sits on dry land, it's hard to believe that the boat was once 185 feet underwater and functioned as a popular diving tourism site. What else do you think they'll find in Lake Mead as the water levels continue to drop? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 5. USS Maine. Built during the late 19th century, the USS Maine was the first U.S. Navy ship to be named after the state of Maine. It was designed as a state-of-the-art advanced vessel that reflected the newest technological developments of the time. But by the time construction on the ship was finished 9 years later, the Maine was obsolete. It was nevertheless put to use in Havana Harbor to protect American interests during the Cuban War of Independence. On February 15, 1898, the ship exploded and sank. The exact cause of the sinking is unknown. Some argued that it was hit by a mine, while others believed that the fire started internally. In 1911, the Maine's hull was repaired and it was refloated. It was towed to a sea and resunk in a location 3,600 feet below the surface. The ship's mast was recovered and now stands as a memorial to its fallen crew members in Arlington National Cemetery. Number 4. Admiral Grafspeed. The German battleship Admiral Grafspeed was built in the mid-1930s as a symbol of the Nazis' naval might as World War II approached. During its short-lived career, it sailed throughout the South Atlantic, raiding and sinking at least 9 Allied merchant ships. In 1939, the ship was struck around 70 times by warships from New Zealand and Britain, leaving 36 men dead and more than 60 injured. Captain Hans Langsdorff navigated to the port at Montevideo in Uruguay to see about having the ship repaired. Although Uruguay was officially neutral, the country was on friendly terms with Britain. Langsdorff knew that if he let the ship undergo repairs, the Uruguayan government would let British officers on board, and that the ship would be interned for the rest of the war if it stayed in port for more than 3 days. Repairs would take an estimated 2 weeks and therefore weren't an option. Langsdorff ordered his crew to destroy all important equipment on the ship. The next day, he and 40 crew members moved the Grafspeed out into the harbor's shallow outer waters and deliberately scuttled it. It burned for the next 2 days until it slipped beneath the surface and came to rest 36 feet underwater. 2 days later, Langsdorff took his own life in a hotel room in Buenos Aires, Argentina. A salvage team began working to raise the wreck in 2004. Because it was considered a navigational hazard, both the Uruguayan government and several members of the private sector funded the recovery effort. Workers soon discovered that the operation would prove to be a lot more complicated than they had anticipated due to challenging winds and currents. Only parts of the Admiral Grafspeed were salvaged, including an 880-pound eagle and swastika statue that was raised in 2006. It's one of just a handful of known surviving examples of the Third Reich's symbol and was seen by many as a controversial reminder of the 9,000 Nazis who fled to South America to avoid prosecution for their war crimes. The statue and numerous other artifacts were salvaged under the command of a businessman named Alfredo Echegaray, who claimed that he spent over $5 million retrieving artifacts from the Grafspeed over a 30-year period. A court ruled that Echegaray legally owns half the statue and that the government also owns half. The businessman accused Germany of pressuring the Uruguayan government to keep the controversial sculpture hidden from the public. He said that the German government has every right to bury an artifact from a dark chapter in history, but that it should at least pay him his fair share in order to do so. The art gallery housing the statue claimed that it was receiving offers for Echegaray's share of ownership, which is supposedly valued at up to $15 million. But the former head of the National Heritage Commission, William Ray Ashfield, scoffed at the estimate. He was one of several people who thought that the statue should go to a museum and be displayed in an educational but not glorifying historical context. Others wanted to see the Nazi relic destroyed. The battle appears to be ongoing. At last update, a court decided that the statue should be auctioned off, leaving many concerned that it would fall into the hands of neo-Nazis. Number 3. SS Sagang. Built in the mid-1920s, the 455-foot-long British passenger and cargo ship SS Sagang routinely traveled between Liverpool, England, and the Burmese city of Rangoon while occasionally sailing other routes, including North America and the Caribbean. In 1939, a German U-boat chased and shot torpedoes at the Sagang in the North Atlantic Ocean while sailing as part of a merchant convoy. Several passengers boarded a lifeboat and were lost at sea, although the ship escaped serious harm. The vessel was less lucky in early 1942 when it left Glasgow after undergoing repairs and headed for Rangoon with a top-secret cargo of munitions aboard. After leaving the port of Colombo in Sri Lanka for Trincomalee Harbor, the crew received a warning that a Japanese attack was likely. The Sagang spent several days at Trincomalee, waiting out several false alarms of impending Japanese attacks before being struck without warning in an air raid. Its captain was incapacitated and the ship began to take on water and list. As the attack continued, a fire broke out. Crew members scrambled to prepare the lifeboats for launching, and most of the passengers and cargo were ultimately saved. In 2013, what's left of the crumbling ship was deliberately scuttled in about 35 feet of water as a pier for naval ships. 4 years later, workers embarked on a 5-month effort to raise and move the vessel to make more room in the harbor. The wreck was sunk again outside the harbor. Number 2. USS Monitor. Built in 1862 for the United States Navy, the USS Monitor was an ironclad warship commissioned by then-President Abraham Lincoln in response to news that the Confederate military was building a similar type of ship. It was ready to set sail just a little over 3 months after being built in Brooklyn, New York. The 179-foot-long ship participated in the Battle of Hampton Roads in Virginia, where it exchanged gunfire with the Confederate ship CSS Virginia. Its career wouldn't last for long, though, and in December of 1862, the Monitor embarked on what would turn out to be its final voyage to Beaufort, North Carolina. The plan was for the ship to join 2 others as part of a blockade off Charleston. 4 days after celebrating Christmas on the vessel, the crew set out for Beaufort. They knew that the Monitor wasn't seaworthy, but they didn't question their orders. While being towed out to sea by a tugboat, the ship encountered a brutal storm and began taking on water and rolling uncontrollably. The crew was unable to pump water out fast enough to stop it from sinking. After numerous attempts to save the Monitor, the surviving crew members abandoned the ship and it sank 16 miles off Cape Hatteras. 16 crew members died at sea and 47 were rescued by the tugboat that had been pulling the vessel when it ran into trouble. The wreck was rediscovered in 1973, 111 years after its sinking, during a joint expedition undertaken by the National Geographic Society, Duke University, and the National Science Foundation. To stop divers and salvage companies from exploiting the wreck, the area surrounding the Monitor became the nation's first designated marine sanctuary in 1975. Efforts to raise the wreck began 20 years later in 1995. Over the course of several years, various parts of the ship were recovered, including its anchor and turret, as well as the remains of 2 sailors and a gold wedding band. The sailors were given a proper burial, and the salvaged parts of the Monitor were conserved and put on display along with a replica of the ship. Number 1. H.L. Hunley. The naval submarine H.L. Hunley, also known as the CSS Hunley, first carried Confederate soldiers into battle in 1863. While entering Charleston Harbor during a mission to destroy a Union blockade on the city, something caused the sub to sink, killing 5 of the men on board. The H.L. Hunley was relaunched a few months later after undergoing repairs, but its 8-member crew died because someone left a valve open, causing the vessel to take on water and sink. Once again, the Confederate Navy recovered the submarine and put it back into service, launching it for a 3rd time in 1864. It managed to sink the U.S. Navy ship USS Housatonic with a torpedo before vanishing, making it the first combat submarine to sink a warship. The submarine remained missing until 1995 when a team of shipwreck hunters discovered it in Charleston Harbor, right next to the Housatonic. It was raised 5 years later and remains on display at a museum. Nobody knows what caused the H.L. Hunley to sink. According to the nonprofit Friends of the Hunley, the crew may have run out of oxygen and suffocated to death due to the tides. Another ship may have clipped the sub. It may have been destroyed by its own torpedo, or an enemy shooter may have somehow disabled the captain, causing the submarine to fill with water and drown the crew. But these are all guesses, and we'll probably never know exactly what doomed the Hunley. Thanks for watching. Which one of these war relics pulled from the water intrigued you the most? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.